you've got a ban coming in pretty soon on any single-use plastic bag, which is under 35 microns. So that's the thin, definitely single-use. You might line a bin with it or something, but it's pretty much that's its life. They're going to be banned across Victoria. But how many of those do you have to take out of the environment for one of those
thicker ones?
The thicker ones.
Yeah.
And if we're just replacing them, then are we actually doing anything in terms of reducing the amount of plastic going on?
Hey everyone, welcome to the next episode of the Think Beginning Not End show from Vanden, and today we're delighted to have Viv Lister from Bespoke Law. Now obviously Viv's a lawyer and Viv works with Australian household brands producing consumer goods, and she's very versed in their decision-making process that goes on inside those businesses about their social and environmental strategies, and helps them with moving things around the world, whether that's the consumer good itself or the product or the waste or the byproduct when those products are being used, right?
Nailed it.
Viv, we've got to know each other. We've been working together a little bit, and I met you a bit over a year ago in some waste industry discussions.
Yeah.
So if you could tell everyone a little bit about yourself and what you do. And
Sure.
Yep.
Yeah. So as you said, I work with consumer brands in Australia and overseas, and one of the areas that I work in is moving things around, regulated things. So that can be food, cosmetics, or waste, because waste is a really regulated product. And when I say waste, I'm also talking about those recovered materials, which I think waste is sometimes a misnomer. Because they're very valuable resources, and I think that's where we met and hit it off, talking about recovered materials and how to make waste part of the everyday conversation with consumers and businesses.
Yeah.
So that's what I do.
So it's a really big topic, obviously in Victoria, but like globally, we're seeing lots of things where waste is ending up in the wrong places, or branded products ending up in the wrong places. But if we just come back to Victoria here, we've obviously got a lot of new guidelines for the waste and recycling industry that are being enforced by the EPA. But what I want to try and talk about is, how regulation actually can have that positive impact on industry, as opposed to, some people look at it as a negative.
Yeah.
But there are some really positive aspects of it.
Absolutely, yeah. I think there's a couple of ways that regulation helps. First of all, it really levels the playing field so that those businesses that are doing the right thing aren't at a disadvantage, because regulation and compliance can cost money, and it can also mean that you can't go after the quick buck. So when some companies are doing the right thing and others aren't, it creates an imbalance. Regulation and well-enforced regulation means that everyone's in the same position, and it encourages businesses to do the right thing and to comply. Another element which was touched on at the BWMA State Conference a year ago, one of the speakers spoke about social license.
Yeah.
And I think that's such a key thing for businesses in the waste and resource recovery industry. You operate in the community, and the community need to give you a social license to do that. And the new EPA regulations are very much focused on acknowledging that the environment and protection of the environment is part of a bigger community, necessity, because it creates this new opportunity for people in the community to enforce or to take legal action against non-compliant businesses. And that's a new element of this regulation. So you don't have to sit back and wait for the EPA to prosecute. You can bring a civil action. And it also creates different levels of compliance requirements, which we haven't seen before. When you have a compliant waste and resource recovery centre, hopefully the intention is that it has less of an impact on the surrounding community, and that's important for our facilities to keep operating and keep dealing with our waste.
Yeah, the positive thing that we've noticed ourselves has particularly been like from our UK facility. Most people know we have that facility there. We don't have one in Australia, but the thing that we've noticed is the regulation over there that is in place. It actually makes you operate at that high level. So yes, it's a high entry level into the industry.
Yeah.
There's a higher cost of operating. But the positive that we've noticed that's come from that is it actually in general makes you a better, safer operator, which creates efficiencies in themselves.
Absolutely, and safety elements, and that goes up. There are so many studies to show that when you have a neat and tidy, whether it's a construction site or factory operations, that the safety record also, or the safety performance also improves. I think that concept of housekeeping on a construction site, it's not only having neat and tidy so there's less litter around, but it's also, it has great safety impacts too.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of great literature that's been written about safety culture driving productivity, and I think, personally, I think the waste and recycling industry has a positive future because there's actually that opportunity gap to get to that level.
Yeah, and one of the things the EPA has been working on, and WorkSafe as well, is eliminating those rogue elements from the waste industry. And when you go out to sites and you see, a kilometre out, you start to see the litter around there, sort of getting more and more as you get towards the facility. You think, well, of course the community here is going to have an issue with the fact that they want to build another resource recovery centre just down the road. But when you have an operation that is really conscious and runs a tight ship in terms of the impacts, whether it's dust, noise, blown away litter, odour, all the things that can come out or emanate from a waste facility. When you have a well-run facility and also social licence, I think we can all benefit.
Yeah. And Viv, are there any examples, from your experience where you've seen some new regulation come in that's been a positive impact on another industry?
Well, it's pretty early days, but at the moment we're seeing some good statistics coming from the e-waste ban.
Okay.
And that was a ban that was brought in 1 July this year. And a number of councils, I think including Whitehorse Council in particular, reported that even in the months leading up to the introduction of the ban, there was a significant increase in the number, or the volume of e-waste, so that's electrical waste, being brought into the drop-off centres, the drop-off points for processing, which means that they're taking out the really valuable minerals like silver, copper, gold from those products and reusing them, and not ending up having your kettles and your toasters and your old computer screens in landfill.
Yeah, I mean that kind of thing is that whole bringing the community on the journey, and if anything, like you said, it's a great example that if we set a standard, we set a regulation, we tell the people about it and we educate them about it, then we can bring them on that journey, and stop that material going from landfill.
Absolutely. I think another one is the plastic bag ban. Now this one has ups and downs, but if nothing else, it's really brought the conversation home to everyday household conversation about plastic and plastic use. And we saw shortly after that plastic bag ban in Coles and Woolies, the little shoppers.
Yeah.
And there was a real conversation about why are you doing that? Why are you introducing plastic when we've just had this ban? And I think had those little shoppers come in at any other time, it probably just would have gone under the radar and all we would have heard about was what a fantastic marketing campaign it was. But instead we had a really important conversation about this is just more plastic junk.
The bit I didn't understand about the little shoppers, and I'm not being critical of it, but when you think when you think about some of those brands that participated in the little shoppers, and on one sense they've got a very public message about, hey, we're making our bottle from recycled material, or we're making our consumer good from recycled material. That's great, but then now we're gonna, like you just said, we're now flooding the market with this whole bunch of other plastic. It's kind of, it's the wrong message, isn't it?
It's completely the wrong message, and at the time it stirred like a bit of controversy, but it was still the most successful marketing campaign of any supermarket in Australia's history. They recently redid it, I think, with the Lion King or something else. And I think because we've all come that much further in the last year in terms of consciousness of plastic, that it was pretty quickly withdrawn, and instead they've got a new one which I love. It's like Hey Ho Let's Grow, and it's
the little seedlings.
And that's something I could get behind. I think that's brilliant. Like, use plastic for things that we need, not these little figurines. But we digress. I think part of what, getting back to your question, was I think the positive is having the conversations and like thinking about it. Brings it into the consciousness and the conversations that we're all having. Yeah, no, I agree. And the other part of with the plastic bag ban is how many of those new they're reusables.
They're reusable plastic bags.
Yeah.
The amount of people that I see walking into Woolworths, Coles and continually buying them.
Yeah.
You got to question, like, do we need to take that a step further as well? Because to be honest, I see a lot of them on the back end when we go to processing facilities. I see a lot of them on the back end that are being collected for recycling, and you can clearly see they've only been used once, and a lot of them seem quite new.
And in terms of recyclability, are they recyclable?
Yeah, they are recyclable, yes. Yeah.
And I think that's the question is, I think I'm fairly informed, and I still don't know these basic questions about what is and isn't recyclable and what's the best option. But from a consumer perspective, I look at that and think, well, you've got a ban coming in pretty soon on any single-use plastic bag, which is under 35 microns. So that's the thin, definitely single-use. You might line a bin with it or something, but it's pretty much that's its life. They're going to be banned across Victoria. But how many of those do you have to take out of the environment for one of those
thicker
ones?
Yeah.
And if we're just replacing them, then are we actually doing anything in terms of reducing the amount of plastic going to landfill?
It's a good point. One thing I've picked up on, and I haven't checked one lately, so but even those reusable plastic bags that you can use more than once, apparently, I've noticed that they don't even have any information on them about what you should do with them once you finish using them. I haven't checked one lately, but the last time I had one, there was nothing on the labelling side of it as well, which comes back to that whole consumer understanding of what to do with it once you finish with it.
And I think, touching on labelling, one of the key things that we're all looking for is labelling about the amount of reclaimed or recovered material that's going into the product. So as a consumer, we want to be able to make those conscious decisions, and that's where the labelling aspect could really be improved. Is there any recovered plastic going into those plastic bags? And what about other products on the shelf? Because that's a labelling that we just don't have at the moment. So that's actually one opportunity, I think, and we've had this conversation with so many of our clients, is if you're wanting to really leverage the good things you're doing, then it needs to be on the label. And I think that there's so little transparency about that, and it actually discourages businesses from making the investment to change to using reused and recoverable materials, because there's no clear way to trumpet to the world that they're doing those good things.
So Viv, do you think some brands are concerned about 100% knowing that if they're going to put it on their product that it's from recyclable? Are you sort of saying that some of those brands are uncomfortable unless they know specifically, or?
In terms of the transparency of their supply chain? I'm not sure that these initial conversations we're having, they've even really thought through to that point.
Yeah.
I think it's more if they're going to make the investment to change what they're doing,
Yeah.
then they want to get credit from their customers for doing so. And without a labelling system that's recognised and really gets that message across quickly, as in they'll be able to leverage that investment, I think it's a difficult decision to make against all the other priorities out there and opportunities. But what you're talking about with the supply chain, I think that comes into the next part. So when a company does decide to go down that path, then there's the fear of, well, if we make this claim, can we substantiate it? And that transparency of the whole supply chain coming back to them, then that comes into it too. Definitely. And you guys work in that area too.
It's an interesting topic. I mean, even people changing the mold of a product, right? Because the product made from recycling content might behave differently. So some of the discussions we've had with manufacturers is when we transition to more recycled content, it actually could change our production facilities, and these are things that people don't really think about, but there are costs involved in changing the entire supply chain, because essentially that's what can happen here.
Absolutely. And when you're talking about things like cosmetics and food and their stability testing, and that stability testing is done in the final consumer packaging. So if that composition is changing, then the whole stability testing needs to be redone. And that's a huge expense and a risk, because if that formula doesn't react the same way in a different type of packaging or a different polymer, it's a big setback. So lots of investment, and I think that's where companies working towards the 2025 changes to consumer packaging, where all consumer packaging will need to be 100% recyclable, compostable, or what's the other one? Biodegradable. Then they're really needing to start now in terms of finding materials that will contain liquids and creams and gels, and then be easily recyclable, compostable.
Do you think it's happening fast enough?
I think there was a little bit of that, like burying our heads in the sand and it will go away, probably for the first year. But now that big companies are getting on board with the research and development that's needed, we're slowly, I think, everyone else is following suit. And Unilever announced last week, I think it was, that they will be using 50% virgin material, so that's 50% non-virgin material by 2025, which is a really good step. And they said that was part of working towards those obligations in Australia as well, with consumer packaging. When big companies make changes, it helps bring everyone else along.
I think exactly that. They're one of the biggest consumer packaging companies in the world, so leading by example. We've spoken a lot about HS codes, and I'll delve a little bit and then I'll get you to explain what a HS code is. But what we're seeing is illegal exports, or more importantly illegal imports, by people changing the HS code. So in some cases, for example, LDPE film, instead of it being under a scrap HS code on the BL, it's being imported as a product, which is illegal. But what is, for everyone out there, what's a HS code? What does it mean?
So the HS code, the Harmonised System Code, is a series of numbers which is an internationally recognised system of classifying everything. So that's, and when I say everything, the basis of the HS code system is that absolutely everything can be classified into one of the HS codes. And that comes down to literally the granular level. And I'm talking about, say, for example, tyres. Shredded tyres, granulated tyres, waste tyres, new tyres, four-wheel drive tyres, performance road tyres, they all end up having a different HS code. It starts with 4 numbers and the 2-number heading and then another 2 numbers, and you've got your 4-number HS code, and then another 2 numbers as you get further and further down the classification. Where you have smuggled waste is where, say, you might have waste tyres, they'll have one code. You classify them as granulated waste tyres, which is a commodity. And where I've seen this happen in particular is Vietnam. So if the HS code is the code for granulated tyres, then Vietnam accepts those because they're basically pellet size, and it comes down, I think, 2.5 centimetres on average pellet size. That's a commodity that they can easily use in industry. So they'll let that HS code through. So when the container arrives, it comes with an import declaration, and the port authority sees the HS code and goes, yeah, that's fine, through it goes. Where actually inside that container, there are scrap tyres or waste tyres which have not been granulated and are full of metals and other contaminants and hazardous chemicals, which are picked up from the road and just in the actual tyre themselves. That's a scrap material that is very difficult to process and is a burden on the industry that it's going to. And usually in Vietnam, they're burnt for fuel, or they're transported by road into China, where they're burnt again for fuel, or potentially processed, but in at a cost or a price that is, it indicates modern slavery type conditions. So it's not a good thing either way. And the issue with HS codes is unless each container is opened and then checked, there's no way of knowing.
So this is where these containers are being found, right? Maybe the authorities are aware of the particular code that things are being changed to, so then they've just flagged anything within those particular code areas and have gone.
And that's what was happening. And so they've just, it's pretty obvious which are the easy ones to tweak. It's a matter of a couple of numbers, just saying that they're shredded or pelleted rather than scrap, and through it goes. So the port authorities or customs authorities are very aware of which are the common HS codes used for smuggling, and Vietnam has cracked down on it. It applies across the board in terms of paper scrap, fabric scrap, tyre scraps. So they've just stopped taking them. And one of the issues in Vietnam is that the Operation Green Fence, which was China's policy before National Sword, came down very quickly without any warning, which is quite typical of a lot of Chinese regulations. And Vietnam was a bit caught out because they were getting all of these container loads coming through, and all of a sudden they couldn't ship them by road across the border. So the importers or consignees just didn't pick them up because there was no market for them anymore.
And we get into this area of abandoned cargo, right?
Absolutely, and then they sit on the wharf. And that's a huge problem because there's no authority to deal with them. And I think there's one port in Vietnam which has over 5,000 containers of smuggled waste which have been abandoned, and somebody's paying demurrage on those containers, which adds up pretty quickly when you've got 100 containers sitting on the wharf there.
So Viv, who's, like, when you get to that point of abandoned cargo, ultimately who's responsible for that? Like, when everyone runs for the hills, but who's responsible for that? And I guess it comes down to Incoterms and all that kind of thing, but it
does to a point, and Incoterms are one of my favourite things to talk about, but it's probably a whole nother podcast on Incoterms. Because of the way that international shipping and international trade does allow certain parties to just abscond and disappear, shipping lines are very clever in contractually making everybody responsible. So the first party that they can actually pin down usually is the party that will be responsible, and customs take the same approach.
So that could even come right back to the person who loaded those goods in that container. Could be made 100% responsible for those shipping costs, the demurrage costs.
And I've seen freight forwarders actually be the only party left standing when the company who consigned the goods, so the company who had a stockpile of tyres, that was a shell company that disappeared. The consignee never picked up the goods in China. And so the only party that was around was the freight forwarder. And they're named on the bill of lading, the terms, that they're usually size 5 font, and you can't really read them without a magnifying glass. And then you see every single party named there as liable and responsible to the shipping line. and the demurrage fees start stacking up. So
Yeah.
then it's a matter of going over and trying to get an authority from a party who's absconded in Vietnam to sign over authority so that you can deal with the containers. And one matter I was involved with, we found the absconded consignee and got the containers assigned over to us so we could bring them back to Australia and de-hire them and pay for them to be processed again. That was a very expensive exercise.
So the knock-on effect of that is rogue operators, or not so much rogue operators, but people selling to other people that they know nothing about and have done no downstream checking, creating problems for people that do follow the right process and the right procedure.
Absolutely, yeah.
And you know, I know from the shipping companies now, like to shipping into certain countries, they're quite nervous, or in some cases they won't ship scrap plastic anywhere.
Yeah.
And some of them have pulled out of a lot of that shipping. So
well, it's difficult to get insurance now for those scrap materials because there is this huge unknown cost or potential cost. For example, going back to Vietnam again, if the customs authority gets wind of the smuggled materials, unless you can find the absconded consignee, the containers go into a process where they are then inspected by the customs authority.
Yeah.
There's a 2-year backlog on that. So the containers will sit there for about 2 years waiting to be inspected. That's a lot of demurrage.
And is that just because of the sheer volume of abandoned cargo there?
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
And there's a cost, so you pay for the inspection, you pay for the destruction, and you pay for the 2 years of demurrage while the containers sit there waiting for their turn. And I understand that cost isn't just arbitrary making money. When you've got a container that you know doesn't contain, or you suspect doesn't contain what the HS code is, there's so much risk of what could be in that container that the authorities have to take a very cautious approach to opening it, and that can even be to the extent of wearing full hazmat gear and quarantining that container, because when it's opened, it's been in the heat, it's been in the cold, it's been tipped around. You literally don't know what's going to come out.
You just wouldn't know what's in there.